Hey Keith, can you hear me? Hi Keith, can you hear me?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. How are you
Okay,
doing?
excellent.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm glad that we have finally come up for this webinar.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry that got delayed for a little while, but yeah,
No,
no, happy
no
to be here.
problem at all. Cool. So we'll wait for 7 more minutes for everyone else to join, and then we'll get started right at 6 p.m.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. I'll mute myself until then, and yeah, I'll set up the rest of the things on YouTube channel. Cool.
Okay,
Thank
cool.
you. Good evening, everyone. This is Aditya from High Counselor. Thank you for joining us today. I can see some of the participants on our YouTube channel. Keith, I'll wait for a couple of more minutes, 2 more minutes for everyone else to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, let's get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, The Day in a Life of a Data Scientist with Keith Santarelli. Thank you so much, Keith, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So before we get started, let me share the quick agenda for today and the ground rules for this webinar. So we'll first start with a quick introduction of High Counselor, and then we'll introduce our guest speaker. During this webinar, we'll have a Q&A format in which we'll ask questions to our speaker, and it's an opportunity for you to jump in and share your questions and concerns regarding data science and career as a data scientist. Okay, so during this webinar on our YouTube channel, you can share this webinar details with your friends and on your social media network so that they can also take advantage of it. You can put your comments in the comments box on the right-hand side, and I'll speak that question to our guest speaker, Keith. And yes, feel free to like, share, and subscribe to this video so that we can reach out to more and more people. Cool. So High Counselor is an online platform, both web and mobile, where we help job seekers connect with the company insiders so that they can get one-on-one career and interview preparation advice. Imagine if you get direct advice and information from someone who's already working in your dream company and dream position. This will dramatically increase your chances of landing job in your dream position. So I won't take any more time, and I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Keith, to everyone. Thank you so much, Keith, again for joining us today. And it'll be great if you can share a quick background of your education and your professional experience. It'll be very helpful.
Sure. I guess if I go back a very long time, just going back to my youngest days, I've always had just a fascination with numbers and math. My mom was a school teacher, and I remember when I was in kindergarten over summer vacation, I used to ask her for, extra math worksheets for me to do just because I always found it to be so fun. And it was something that I enjoyed a lot in grade school. When I got time to trying to figure out what I wanted to do beyond that in college, I wasn't really sure entirely what I wanted to do, but my father was a technician. He worked for Raytheon, one of the big defense contractors, building the Patriot missiles. And I had two older brothers who were electrical engineers, so I decided that I would go into that. So when I was 18, I headed to MIT and majored in electrical engineering in circuit design. I discovered sort of the hard way that wasn't a very good fit for me. I wished I could say that it was only, say, one time that I caused a fire in the laboratory, but my lab work had sort of a tendency to to cause some damage to the projects and the people around me, unfortunately. So when it came time to pursue a graduate degree, I moved into something that was a little bit more commensurate with my mathematical background. And so I got a PhD in control theory, studying the design of different types of feedback loops. When I was done with my PhD, I wanted to move into industry, and I made a move into the defense sector. I was there for about 10 years or so. And there I was mainly working on various signal processing problems, trying to use information from sensors to infer things that were important to military operations. So for instance, I worked on some problems where we were trying to figure out using arrays of microphones to figure out if somebody was shooting at your military vehicle and from what direction that they were shooting, so that you could move in a direction where you would be safe. Did some work trying to figure out using geophones to figure out if people were digging tunnels underneath the surface of the borders of different countries. Did some work trying to figure out when adversaries were trying to jam our GPS signals to deny our troops navigation, and building counter systems to counter that jamming. So I worked on, I've been working on sensor type problems for a very long time. And truth be told, I actually didn't know what data science was for a very long time. It was probably about 7 years ago or so where I was starting to look for new jobs, and I got contacted by a recruiter out of the blue one day, and he was listening to my background. He said, "Well, have you ever considered data science roles?" And I just asked him. I said, "Oh," I said, "Well, what's that? I've never heard of that before." And basically, after he described the role for me, I realized that I was basically doing data science already in the government sector, and that's essentially how I ended up with my first data science job. And I've been in the field for about 4 years now, working at various companies. I just started a new role at Bose Corporation about a month ago in a newly formed health division, and am excited about what the future holds there.
Great. Thank you so much, Keith, for sharing your background. It seems like you have worked in diverse sectors, and it's great to hear that you have moved from like a military background to industry in the data science role. So how was this transition? Like, was it difficult? As you said, like you're already doing a data science job, but now you're you're doing the job more professionally, right? As with the title of data scientist. So how was this transition? Can anyone transition from a technical background into a data science position, or do you need to have some kind of educational skills or technical skills?
So I think the transition into a data science role depends upon where you're coming from. So, in my mind, there are typically two categories of people who tend to transition into data science roles. So one is, people with strong quantitative backgrounds, like physicists, mathematicians, engineers, chemists. There's also another sector of people who are more from, say, the software engineering side of things, who want to become data scientists. And depending upon which end of the spectrum you come from, I think the way that you transition is a bit different. So from the scientific side, from the people with the background in computation, I think one of the bigger challenges for some people, and this was true for me, was that I didn't have a lot of background using many of the common tools that are used for data science right now. I didn't know, I had never used Python before, so I'd never used any of the packages like Pandas, NumPy, SciPy, TensorFlow, anything like that. So that was actually a roadblock for a while. When I first started applying to data science jobs, I I didn't have any of this background, and I was telling people, well, I have MATLAB experience. But a lot of companies, most companies I would say today, they don't necessarily want to pay people to learn how to use software. I did in the end actually find a company that was willing to actually hire me with just a MATLAB background and give me the time to actually learn Python, which was a fantastic opportunity. But I don't think that that's terribly common these days. So I think if you don't happen to have have the software background for these things, there fortunately are a lot of ways to get that on your own. I think there are a lot of great boot camps out there. The data incubator is one of them. And it's designed exactly for this purpose, for people who have very strong computational backgrounds, but just may not have used a lot of the common tools. You can work in these boot camps for, say like 4 to 8 weeks, and it gives you a lot of exposure to the different tools, so that when you're interviewing, you can actually tell people, well, I have experience, using these tool packages. And also, here's a project that I did that I can show you, where I can showcase how I actually apply the skills. If you're coming from the other side of things, from the software engineering side of things, one thing that I've seen a lot of people do is to take what I've been seeing as advertised as data science engineering positions. So they're a little bit of a bridge between data science and data engineering, where you're actually building the pipelines or responsible for the production models of whatever code is being deployed. And I know a few people who've taken on these roles, and they can basically get started by using their software engineering skills to be dealing with the engineering side of things, but also taking some opportunity to get involved in some more of the actual scientific projects. Perhaps creating some dashboards just to get used to some of the data that's being collected, and to create some summary statistics of things that are useful to people, and then gradually increasing from there to doing things like algorithm development.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much, Keith. That's very, very helpful. So, Keith, how would you define data science to beginners?
So, I guess the short way I would describe data science is, I would say that data science is essentially about finding patterns in data, and that people with strong quantitative backgrounds and people who potentially like to do things like solve puzzles could potentially be good data scientists. That's sort of like the 15-second tagline. If I went into a little bit more detail there, I would say that data science always, in the commercial sector, this may not be true in academia, but in the commercial sector, there's always some sort of application tied to it, where you're trying to solve, some sort of a need for a business. The last job that I worked at, we were trying to figure out how well people drove, so that we could coach them into becoming better drivers. So there's a lot of technical problems that are involved in that, obviously. Taking the information from the raw sensors and trying to remove noise and corruption, and doing things like identifying different types of features and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's all for the purpose of actually creating products for a company, aimed at some sort of business goal.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much, Keith. So, Keith, as you mentioned that you have been in data scientist role for almost 4 years now. So what's your typical day as a data scientist? Like, do you spend more time in doing coding or doing the technical work? Or do you also meet with other people in your company, like conducting meetings? So what exactly does it look like?
So I think one of the things that I love about being a data scientist is that I don't think that there is a typical day, actually. And that's a great thing for me. I like having some sort of variety in terms of the types of activities that I do, just so that I'm not doing the same exact thing day in and day out, kind of getting bored. One unique thing about my line of work, so since the type of data science that I'm involved in is data science for sensor data, that involves actually doing a lot of experimental work from time to time. So, just a couple of weeks ago, I was helping to prototype an experiment that we're trying to roll out to about 120 people or so. So, I had basically, I was just strapped down all over my torso with different sensors. I had about like 5 different belts on me. I had like a nasal cannula that was measuring some information. And, once I had all of these sensors hooked up, I was told to perform some particular controlled motions so that they could, so that we could basically make sure that the sensors are, basically behaving the way that we expect to. And then there was some period of time after that where I was basically just trying to do some very basic analyses of the data to make sure that everything was as expected, that the sensors were recording properly, and that there were no unexpected artifacts somehow. So as an example of something that we found, it turned out that one of the sensors was sampling at half the sampling rate that we expected it to be, and what it was designed to actually be sampling at. So, that involved me going back to some of the hardware people and talking to them and figuring out why that was happening and how to fix that. Because that's not the type of thing that you want to have happen, when you're trying to deploy this to 120 people. So that's actually a bit of a unique aspect of my job that happens from time to time. That's definitely not every day, but there will be spurts of experimental work. But other than that, my daily activities, when I'm in the zone, I guess I would say, I'll be doing some analyses or some experiments in Jupyter notebooks, or maybe working in some sort of an IDE like PyCharm to actually package up some of the prototype algorithms that I've been working on, so I can make packages and share that information with people. And then there are some days that are a little bit more project planning or project review, or talking to coordinating with other staff members to see who's going to be working on what parts of a project. But then there are other days too that, where I get to do things like go to conferences and, learn about other work people are doing, learn about new techniques, or, to take some training classes. So for instance, the past couple of days, I've actually been in some all-day classes learning about, best practices for software development for medical devices. So really, there's just there's a whole lot of different things that are involved in the type of work that I do. So yeah, I guess there's no typical day to day for me. There's a lot of variety, which makes it exciting.
And I think that's the beauty of being a data scientist, right? That you're dealing with different challenges every single day. So yeah, that's why I love that. Thank you so much. And Keith, there is a lot of confusion between what is data science and what is data analytics. So can you provide the distinction between the two, or is it the same thing?
So I'll certainly give you my perspective on this, because I think there's a lot of there are a lot of varied opinions on what the distinction is between these two, or like you say, if there's a distinction at all. So in my mind, the kind of the fundamental dividing line between data science and data analytics is who is ultimately making a decision with the data that's being processed. If it's a human, then I think that tends to be data analytics. If it's a machine who's making decisions, then I would call that data science. So to provide some examples on that. So for instance, dashboards, for instance, that characterize a company's revenue data, for instance. This is a common tool that's used in a lot of businesses, where there'll be some sort of a dashboard that might make some plots of the past revenue stream, might create some summary statistics. And the point of these is to take all of the raw data that is there and turn it into something that is digestible by a human. And at the end of the day, the purpose of these tools is to, allow some C-suite executives to take a look at, some compressed versions of these data and make some business decisions about how they might want to change their product lines, or, if they need to hire more people, or that sort of thing. By contrast, I would say taking that a step further to doing something like creating, not just looking at, say, the historical returns or the historical data that's been measured, but actually creating something like a forecast for what you expect your revenue to be over, say, the next quarter or the next year, based off of some assumptions or some factors that you have some knowledge about. That is something I would say is much more on the side of data science, because there you're actually having an algorithm go through and compute some sort of a quantity that's an estimate of the future. Sort of a different example in the context of some other things that I've worked on before. Going back to some of the work that I did in mobile telematics, we had some people who created some dashboards that would describe some statistics on, for a particular geographic area, for instance, how many people, what percentage of drivers would speed on a particular highway, or on average, how frequently would drivers jam on their brakes. So, going through and creating some summary statistics of things that we can measure. That being sort of on the data analytics side. On the data, what I would say is sort of the work that we had to do on the data science side there was actually writing the algorithms that would take the information from the raw accelerometer and gyroscope data and figure out how to classify when somebody had jammed on their brakes or not. So for me, the fundamental dividing line is who is sort of the end entity to make the decision. But I think the example that I gave about forecasting, I think some people would even still call that data analytics. So that's just my opinion, but there's a lot of variation out there in terms of what people think the distinction is.
Great. Thank you so much, Keith. So Keith, we have one question from our live attendee, Jessica Lee. So Jessica asks, what are your everyday challenges as a data scientist? And what are your recommendations for beginner data scientists?
So everyday challenges, that's a great question. I suppose there's a few of them. One I would say is, and this is an important one too, is communicating with non-technical audiences. For people with strong technical backgrounds on a day-to-day basis, you're typically communicating with other people that have strong technical backgrounds. So it's easy to use, technical jargon or, say common terms from like statistics or probability or whatnot. But at some point, you're going to have to present some of your results to somebody that doesn't have the same type of background that you do. So learning to distill the information, but the things that you've been working on into a manner that people with a non-technical background can understand is a huge asset, and can be a big challenge sometimes. Over time, after you've done it a few times, you develop a few tricks of the trade. But every person that you deal with is different. So I think there's always just sort of a feedback loop between you and the other person to figure out, is the information that I'm trying to portray getting across. And sometimes you might discover that despite your best initial efforts, that you're not able to communicate the the message that you're trying to deliver. And so then it's just a matter of going back to the drawing board and trying to figure out like, okay, well, why is it that this person couldn't understand what I was trying to say? Is there a simpler way that I can describe my message that doesn't rely upon say so much math, for instance, so that people understand the business value to things. So that's one thing I would say is a challenge, and something that's good to get practice on from the very beginning. Another thing that can start to be a challenge with time is just having the time to make sure you're still learning about new techniques and new work that's being done outside of your immediate space. I think a lot of times there's a tendency for all scientists, independent of level, to really put your nose to the grindstone, just really be focusing on getting your day-to-day work done, which, I mean, that's that's a good thing. That's what you get a paycheck for. But then it can be sort of easy to kind of fall by the wayside in terms of knowing sort of the latest and greatest that's out there. So, one way to stay abreast of things is to go to conferences whenever you can. But that, obviously that's time away from work and money that small companies, for instance, don't always have the resources to support. But some other simple things that you can do. One thing that I've actually organized in a couple of the jobs that I've worked at in the past are lunch and learns, where basically, a different person once a month does a presentation on the work that they've been doing. And even though it's in-house work, it really can give you an opportunity to learn about different techniques that you might not have had the chance to work with before, or just to learn about different projects that are going on within the company. From the technique side of things, though, it can be very good just to know, even if you're not going to be trying a new technique right away, just to know, like, well, at least now I know that, so-and-so, Mike Smith gave a talk on neural networks. So if I ever get into the position of needing to learn about neural networks, I can go to him and just start asking him some questions to find, to kind of get started and whatnot. I mean, those are a couple of strong challenges, I guess I would say, and yeah, just a couple of recommendations for how to circumvent them.
Okay, thank you so much, Keith, for your response. Okay, so we have another question from our attendee, Nicholas Vincentini. So Nicholas is asked, I'm planning to make a master in data science. What should I consider? What do you think would be most important to check in the syllabus before choosing where to study?
I mean, I guess is it possible to ask questions back, or no?
I think I know it might be difficult.
Okay,
but
all right.
it's
that's
more about like, yeah, like what's the most important syllabus before choosing where to study. I'm not sure like how to answer this.
Okay, no, sure. I mean, I guess I think it can be tough to actually figure out sort of based off of a syllabus of classes which institution might be the best one for you to pursue in a degree in. Mm-hmm. I guess one of the things I would say is, if you have some sort of an idea of the type of space that you might want to end up, that could help you. That might actually be a little bit more illuminating in terms of helping you make a decision. At the end of the day, I mean, every data science program, I think, is going to give you some sort of basic experience in statistics and machine learning. The balance that they give you in that, and also the set of applications that they focus on, I think, are the things that will that will vary from institution to institution. But if you have some sort of a sense of knowing that you might want to focus on data science for marketing applications, for instance, versus doing data science for, for the types of things that I do that are more sensory based, that have a little bit more of an engineering component to them, I think that can kind of help you figure out what institutions to focus on. So for instance, here in the Boston area, if you are interested in data science that's more closely tied to business outcomes or business analytics, Bentley University has some great programs for kind of joint data science, business analytics types of degrees. Whereas, if you're interested in data science that requires more of an engineering or a physics-based background, you might want to go to a more traditional engineering institution. Those are at least the factors that I would consider when I'm if I were trying to make a decision on what schools to apply to or to go to.
Yeah, I think that makes most sense, right? If you identify where you want to land your career, I think identifying those topics can help you identify the right college.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So Keith, these days, job search has been a troublesome task for recent graduates and also for experienced professionals in data science category, because there are a lot of jobs available, definitely. But again, the competition is very high. So what job search strategy would you recommend to find a data scientist role, someone for like a fresh graduate, as well as for someone with 3 to 5 years of experience as well?
Sure. So, I think what I see as the biggest challenge for basically applicants of any age, whether you're a fresh graduate, whether you're 3 to 5 years of experience, whether you have 20 years of experience, is just making sure that the hiring manager knows that you exist and that you have some skills that he or she could use. Because just submitting your resume online to company websites, it often just doesn't cut it these days. So for instance, at my last job, we advertised a position for a summer internship. And within 3 days of posting the job, there were 400 resumes in our company's inbox. And
wow.
Yeah, no, 3 days, 400 resumes. And we only had one recruiter working on this. And it's at that point, you can't, the recruiter can't read through each resume in detail and really do a ton of filtering. So it becomes, resumes often just get subject to things like keyword searches, or literally like, a 5 to 10 second scan. And if you can't portray what it is that, if you can't portray what it is that you can offer this company in that 5 to 10 second scan, then you get put in the pile of resumes that just doesn't get considered. So I think there are a couple of strategies that you can take to help you get beyond that initial screening phase. So one is, if you happen to know people who work at the company, then absolutely contact them and tell them that you're interested in a particular, in a data scientist position. Tell them a little bit about what they're looking for, and ask them if they'd just be willing to go to the hiring manager just to present your resume, just say that they know you, tell them a little bit about you. Because that personal connection, there's really just no substitute for that when that exists. I think in general, if there's one thing that I've observed in hiring trends over the years, it's that people like to hire people for which they have some sort of a connection, if not a personal connection of their own, a connection that somebody that they work with has with somebody else. It just makes them makes them trust a little bit more that the person that they're bringing on is going to be a good fit. In the absence of that, though, I think one of the best things that you can do is to submit a cover letter with your resume, because that's really a chance for you to, because not everybody does that. So there are often fewer cover letters to go through, and that will generally mean recruiters might give those a little bit more time. And that's a chance for you to construct a narrative about what you've done, what you want to do, and to show the enthusiasm that you might have for a particular position. So, just to ground this in my own job search that I was performing just a few months ago, when I was writing a cover letter for Bose, where I work now, my goal was to show them that I wasn't just a person who, could write some code, create some plots, and do just the things that the job description called for. I wanted to show them that I could do more. So, in my cover letter, I talked about a lot of the experimental work that I did in my previous job, how I, designed an experiment where I brought in 50 people off the street to gather a particular type of data set. I talked about how I worked with our legal team to write patents, how I worked with our marketing team to recruit people. I basically was painting this picture of a person who was going to do whatever needed to be done to get the job done and to move the technology toward products. So, obviously, how you construct your own cover letter and your own narrative is strongly depends upon what you're looking for. But I think it's a really golden opportunity to tell a story and to grab people's attention, and at least to get your resume in the pile of people that they schedule for a phone interview. And I can certainly say that every time that I have written a cover letter like this, I have always gotten a phone interview, hands down.
So that is an effort totally worth it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It is absolutely worth spending the time to write a cover letter.
Great. Awesome. So Keith, we have another question from one of our live attendee. So the question is, how do you work if the data you I would repeat it again. How do you do your work if the data you work with is inconsistent? Are there good practices or rules that a data scientist can apply?
So I think that's a great question, because I think, the vast majority of our data actually has some sort of inconsistencies in it. And that actually ties back to one of the things I was talking about a few minutes ago. In the sensors worlds, we run these very small validation studies where we just gather data from a few people to try to get rid of some of the larger inconsistencies from the get-go. So you run some basic experiments where what the data waveform should look like, and you really, you start to plot the data. You look for inconsistencies, missing values. Another common one in the sensor world is values that are repeating in patterns. So a lot of times, if a register gets stuck on a piece of hardware, it'll just output the same floating point value for several samples in a row. So that's something that that we tend to look for. But the basic idea is, a lot of time in the beginning when we're working with a different sensor, for instance, we will spend a lot of time trying to find some of these common inconsistencies so that we can actually just go back and try to correct the hardware to get rid of the inconsistency. Now, that being said, you don't always have that luxury, especially if somebody else is collecting data for you. You just have to live with what they send you. So, there, a lot of times what we do is to write some very basic tests that will identify some of these phenomena and tell us how, give us some indication of how frequently a certain non-ideality might be occurring. So for instance, missing values, I mean, those are very easy to detect, in something like a pandas data frame, those will just show up as like nans. And so you can basically do some sort of account to say, well, how many values am I missing compared to, the whole length of my data record? If that tends to be something like a very small fraction, then, say like 0.5% or something like that, then it might just be sufficient to just say, okay, I'll just remove those rows of data and I'll just deal with everything else that I have. But if there are sometimes though that it might be the situation that it's a much larger fraction, and it's enough that if you were to remove that data, you might actually not have enough data to do the type of training that you want to do. In which case, you either do have to do some of the types of things I was just talking about, where you go back to the people who collected the data and just say, well, we're noticing that a lot of values are missing. Is there anything that you can do to help us? Or, if another route that sometimes we take is we would just try to find other data sets, sometimes publicly available data sets, to actually, fill some of the needs that we have for a particular data type. But I guess at the end of the day, there's sort of no one size fits all approach. I think really when you're trying to find problems with your data, really you just start by taking short data cuts and making a whole bunch of plots to see if you can see any sort of anomalies, and then kind of go from there. Just kind of start basic and go from there.
Mm-hmm. That's perfect. Thank you so much, Keith, for the wonderful answer. And so, Keith, these days there are different there are so many data science companies, even the companies which are not purely which do not purely work on data science technology. They also hire data scientists. So what is the interview format of for a data science position, both for beginners and for experienced employees like yourself?
Okay. So I mean, I think so. Some of the commonalities, I would say, between pretty much all data science interviews, there's going to be some level of technical questioning. When you go into, for an in-person interview in particular, there'll be some sort of exercises where you have to go to the board, where people will ask you some questions about, statistics or machine learning or whatnot. And then also maybe some basic questions on coding. I think the types of questions or the level of question will change depending upon the seniority of the candidate. I think a lot of times for junior candidates, people who are fresh out of school, the questions will tend to be a bit more concrete. So, you'll be given a very specific problem, and, say just like a probability problem or something, and they'll just ask you to do certain things, like, tell me what the mean of this distribution is, or the variance, or, this, whatever else they decide to ask. I think with more senior level candidates, that type of questioning doesn't really get asked quite as much as more open-ended questions where, so actually when I interviewed at Bose, instead of having them give me an example, a very particular machine learning question they wanted to ask me, they just asked me to talk a bit about some problems that I worked on in machine learning. And then they probed me a bit to learn more about what I did, what my specific contributions were, and also to ask me some questions about, like, well, have you considered solving that particular problem this other way, say using like a logistic regression instead of what you were doing here, just to get a little bit more sense of the candidate's breadth and ability to explore different problem solving strategies. So I mean, that's a differentiation, at least on the technical side of questioning. I would say there's about a 50-50 split, I would say, at this point, that candidates are going to be required to do some sort of a presentation on work that they've done in the past. It used to be when I would apply for jobs that basically every single job would ask me to do some sort of a presentation. Present a project that you've worked on in the past, and we'll ask you some questions about it. Now I think a lot more companies are in favor of giving people a case study to work on instead, and these can vary in length. I've had some companies where basically they do the entire case study in about an hour. So it's something very simple and just basically aimed at checking whether you can just do some basic coding or not. And I've had others where they give you an assignment that, could take, say, 4 or 5, 6 hours to complete. And, so you go, you work on it, you write up some sort of a description that you send to them, and then either you present your results to them, say, over the phone, or you present it to them during a live interview. I think a lot of companies are moving that way just because they want to get a sense of whether the person can actually solve the particular types of problems that they are really interested in solving. And then, so those are the main types of technical questions that I would say are asked. In terms of more soft questions, I think every job will ask people, why are you interested in this position? And that's something that I think you need to be able to answer very sincerely. There are times where, I've asked people that question in the past, and they take some sort of a flattery strategy where they say like, oh, like this company is the absolute best at what they do, or, you have a really strong educational background and I would really love to work with you. But that doesn't really answer the question that people are trying to get at. When people ask you, why do you want to take this job? They're really trying to learn about what makes you tick. Like, what are your career goals? What is the type of work that you try to do? And that's really what you want to tell people. And to be fair, sometimes job descriptions don't give you a very, an extremely clear sense of what the company is looking for, you as a data scientist to do. So you can use that as you can use that question as an opportunity to open up a dialogue to learn about that. So, for instance, for somebody like me, if I don't know a lot of details about what the actual job is about, I can tell people, well, I have, X number of years working with sensors. It's something that I'm really passionate about. I'm in general looking for positions that are going to allow me to get back into the sensor processing space for applications that are actually going to help people on a day-to-day basis. I'm wondering if you can actually tell me a little bit more about some of the projects that you've been working on, or what are some of the more direct needs that you have in hiring a data scientist right now that you could tell me about to help clarify what you're looking for. But at the end of the day, you want to either have some sort of a dialogue like that, or tell people why you're looking for that position and why that company is a good fit for you. Because if you can't say that, there's going to be somebody else in the interview mix that's going to be able to answer that well and give a much stronger impression.
That's absolutely right. Cool. So you need to know how to sell yourself as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, selling yourself is a huge part of this, and I think for me, I know when I first started out, that was something that was very hard. But I think the more practice you get with it, the easier it becomes.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Okay, so we are reaching the top of the hour, so I'll just take 1 or 2 more questions. So Keith, what resources in terms of website, books, or blogs would you recommend to aspiring data scientists to prepare for interviews?
So I think one resource that I recommend to any job seeker, data scientist or not, is this. There's this woman named Liz Ryan. She runs a business that she calls Human Workplace. She used to be the head of HR for some Fortune 500 company. I don't remember exactly which one it was, but she now has a business where she helps people navigate through the job search process to help land them, the jobs of their dreams. So she just has a lot of helpful articles and a lot of helpful blogs to tell you, for instance, how to write cover letters, how to answer some difficult to navigate questions during interviews. Like if you've been unemployed for a while and people ask you about that, kind of how to navigate those waters, or how to navigate salary negotiation, for instance. So she's somebody that I really recommend just kind of reading some of her blogs and getting some general advice for job interview and job search prep. Another basic website that I recommend to people is LinkedIn. And in particular, I think most companies will send you, an interview schedule when they invite you in, so that you have the names of the people that you're going to be interviewing with. So, I mean, one of the big things that I'll do is just I'll look at, on LinkedIn at each of the people that I'm interviewing with, just to understand a little bit about their background, particularly for people who are I don't want to say non-technical, but may not have a purely technically focused role. You might want to at least get some sense of what they do, so that you have some common talking points to talk to them about. So for instance, if you see that you're going to be talking to a product manager, you just might want to have some examples ready to go about if you've worked with product managers in the past, what types of projects you've worked with them on, and what were some of the benefits of working with a product manager, that sort of thing. And I guess the last thing that I generally would recommend looking at is just the company website, just giving it a scan before you go in. I think there's generally a lot that you can learn about the culture just by looking at the website and seeing the types of things that they emphasize in terms of work-life balance, looking at potentially at some of the other positions that they're hiring for. Are they hiring for a lot of data scientist positions, or are they hiring for this one position, and are you going to be basically the one data scientist for the company, just to kind of give you a little bit more of a sense of what they're looking for, looking to hire.
Great. Thank you so much, Keith. And I'll take just one last question. Sorry, we have a couple of questions here, but I'll choose one out of it. So my next question is, what project would you like to work on in the future, whether personal or within a company? What would inspire you?
Oh, that's a great question. Projects that I'd like to work on in the future. I mean, I guess in general, one of the things that I am interested in is getting I haven't done a whole lot in the deep learning space. So I'm sort of interested in learning about and having some sort of a project where I can actually try to apply deep learning just to learn some of the tools and to figure out how well it works. I actually do have a particular project in mind. It's unfortunately not one that I can talk about because it's a company proprietary sort of thing. But yeah, that's definitely one thing that I'm interested in doing. And the other non-professional thing that I've actually been meaning to do, as I told you in the beginning, I've always loved math, so I still try to just dabble a little bit in theoretical math from time to time. And I have this book in abstract algebra that I bought, probably like 5 or 6 years ago, that's just sitting on my shelf getting dusty. And when I have some time, I have a plan to read through that and actually try to learn a little bit more about that.
Great. Thank you so much, Keith, for sharing that with us. Cool. So with that, I'll wrap up the webinar. And thank you so much, Keith, for your time, for your participation, for sharing your insights, your advice, and your knowledge. That was really, really, really helpful.
Oh, absolutely. Happy to do it. Thanks for having me as a guest. It was a lot of fun.
No problem. Thank you so much. I'll just take 2 more minutes to wrap up the webinar. So please allow me to share my screen. Okay. So to all our attendees, I'll like to share a little bit more details about High Counselor and our vision and why we organize these webinars and what's the purpose of having High Counselor. So we identified that most of the job seekers struggle to land their dream job because of the 3 major reasons. First, they don't have a good network. So that's why they don't get the referral from the company insiders. Also, they have very limited information on the company and the job role, which makes them not a perfect candidate for a particular position. Also, most of the time, interviews are not 100% prepared for the interview. So to resolve these 3 problems, we came up with a product called High Counselor, where our objective is to connect job seekers with company insiders so that they can get crafted and a perfect advice for a particular job position. So how you can use High Counselor? You can simply go to the High Counselor website or mobile application, search someone currently working in your dream company, and you can immediately book a phone or an email appointment with them. We have counselors on our platform who are working at top companies like Google, Facebook, Schlumberger, NASA. So if your if your career area is data science, product management, or consulting, definitely check out our platform. We have conducted a lot of webinars until now. As you have seen, the value Keith has provided in this webinar. So we do record these webinars so that you can access them later on our YouTube channel. So please feel free to check out our webinars on our YouTube channel. It'll provide you a lot more valuable information. And if you like this webinar, if you like our efforts to help you land your dream job, please feel free to share a brief message about High Counselor on your social media network so that we can have more and more attendees in our next webinar, and that will be very, very helpful. So again, thank you so much everyone for joining us today evening on this webinar, and a big thanks to Keith. Thanks again for your time and for your participation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Great. So I'll see you everyone in the next webinar. Everyone have a wonderful evening. Bye.